Thanks to our Patreon members for helping to make this episode possible, and we're now available on all the major podcasting platforms. You can find more information at the links below. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to House of the Intellect, Part 5. And today I want to bring together the threads that we've been talking about in the first 4 parts, which is a mix of the cultural environment and our personal predilections and training and education and thought patterns, and how those two things combine to rob us of the very intellectual and cultural home that so many people are striving for. And the example I want to use is film. I'm not a film person. I'm not opposed to movies. I'm glad people enjoy them. I watch some, enjoy some, but mostly I'm a person of the book. I'm a person of the word rather than a person of the image. I'm not huge on painting either, which is sort of a not unrelated field. But this cultural dominance of film, I don't think can really be questioned. If archaeologists in 1,000 years are digging up our societies, they'll look around and go, wow, this was the culturally dominant art form. Like they have these special temples almost in every city where people went on a regular basis. People had huge collections. There was, vast amounts streaming on all kinds of different mediums. They could watch screens all the time in all kinds of places. Homes had many screens to make access to this art form. This medium is the one that's winning today. Just as the way, as literacy was rising, it was the book. You look back in time and they see this explosion of the book after the invention of the printing press. And you go, oh my gosh, this was a medium that really came to be dominant over the spoken word, over theater also, by the way, in a certain amount at the time, predating the book. So I don't think that's even a question, but what's interesting to me and also slightly distressing is the degree to which our, again, personal habits, of which we've been trained up in our cultural expectations, and the way the medium is presented to us combines to take from us the very value that we should find in the medium that we love the most culturally. So I'm always fascinated by this, and I taught a course regularly, about every other year for 20 years, I taught a course called Art of Film. And I always told my students, I said, look, you've all spent vastly more time watching movies and seen vastly more movies than I have. And so we're going to do this as a cooperative endeavor. You have to help me, and I'll help you. And what I learned through that is how little all of this film viewing had added to the quality of their lives, to their sense of themselves, to their intellectual development, which is not in some cases, or even predominantly, the problem of the films that they're watching or whatever. It's not a content issue. It's a cultural expectation and structural issue. And that's what I want to explore. And again, Barzan, so taking this idea from Barzan, he talked about this to a very limited degree, but he did mention that, he was a huge baseball fan. And what always surprised him is that, not that there weren't a lot of other huge baseball fans, because there were, particularly in his time, baseball hugely popular in the United States, but how little Americans made of the baseball that they watched and participated in. How little sense of community and value and intellectual development and history and thought that it actually gave them. This is the question. This is how one builds, again, the house of the intellect. So film, what am I talking about? How does this manifest itself? Again, the dominant medium. We don't need to go into that. I think there's no question about this. But look at the nature of its consumption. So generally speaking, and I talk to my students about this, if you go to a movie, it is an external entertainment that is considered to be episodic. It's like, okay, I'll go to a movie with my friends. We may talk about it a little bit after the film, and then we move on to another film. Or if they had watching parties, which they often did, my students love to do this, I'm sure you people are familiar with this, they'd get 3 or 4 or 5 of their friends over and they'd binge watch a film. So they'd watch, a series or something, or they'd watch a series of related movies, maybe all the Star Wars movies or something, or they'd binge watch a whole season of some TV show that they liked. But the discussion And the interaction with that relative to the watch time would be like a 95.5. So they would watch the content for 6 hours, and they might have 20 minutes or 30 minutes of actual discussion or jokes or comment on what they were watching. And then that was it. We're done. Go away, go over, do that again. And that is the bizarre ratio of not taking something in and taking it seriously, not taking yourself and your experiences and your views and your reactions seriously. And how I see this manifest not just in young people and in college students is if you go into people's homes, as I did, in many cases, you just go in people's house and see this one. I was often amazed at the amount of money people had invested in their home theater systems. I'm like, wow, this is amazing, right? Like some of these, these huge TVs, excellent sound systems, they really put thought into placing them in there. So as we spoke earlier, they are investing in this. They like this medium. They've invested in it. Great. So you've got this huge screen, nice sound system, good players. They've got that. So the windows can be darkened, all this, the comfortable chairs. And almost invariably, I can think of two exceptions, but almost invariably, this was set up as a private experience, which is nothing wrong with that, right? But this was an entirely private experience so that there would be maybe 2 chairs, or if it was a family of 3 or 4, maybe there would be 4 chairs. So perhaps the family could sit together and watch something, but it was really designed for 1 or 2 people to sit and watch something, which is not a problem. But you've just spent 10 or 15 or 20 or $100 or $200,000 putting in a home, or more, by the way, not to share. So this notion of that these things are to be consumed privately, they aren't to be shared, they aren't to be discussed. And so when I think about it, in the small town where I used to live, how many really spectacular home theater systems there were. You would think that people would have organized, say, I love, post-war German films, or I'm a huge fan of, Japanese silent film. I don't know, whatever people are into. I don't care, right? They would, hey, once a month or once every 2 weeks, anybody who's interested, I'll put out a general, we'll kind of cultivate a group of people who are interested in this. We'll have them come to the house and we'll watch a famous one, or if it's something short, maybe we'll watch 2, and then we can talk about it and discuss it and, sort of reflect on, what this means, why we're interested in it, what's going on with this film, how it's constructed, on all the things that you would normally do if you love this. And so going back again to, say 100 years ago, one of the things you read consistently in the memoirs of philosophers or writers or thinkers, or even politicians from that time period, is they would read novels, or they would go to an art show, and then they go to a cafe or a coffee shop or a salon, and they would talk about it. To the point where it was a cultural expectation, right? Like, so it became clear at some point, like, people were going to these shows or reading certain books because they're like, oh, everyone's going to be talking about this. So let's go and see, so that when we go to a salon or a cafe and we sit down with people, we're going to be there for a couple of hours, say 2, and I need to have, 15 to 20 to 30 minutes of thoughtful commentary and response sort of meditated upon, or else I'm just, like, why is this person here? What are they doing? They're just sucking up space. They're not thinking, they're not responding to and reflecting on. And so it's actually the very volume of film that people tend to consume and media that mitigates against this. So it's not that they haven't invested in it. It's not that they don't like it. But what they've been trained in is that liking it means consuming a lot, right? The more I consume, if I have 10,000 DVDs or SACDs or whatever they are, the Blu-rays, I guess, or if I stream 20 movies a week, and I had students, by the way, who watch them on high speed so they can see more, right? Like, more equals commitment equals value. This is how if I just watch more and more and more and more and more, and then when they try to talk about it, what they will say is, well, I've watched all of them. I've watched all of them 100 times. And it's like, okay, now what have you done with that? How have you incorporated into this life? How have you stopped, reflected on, changed your thinking, expanded your mind, altered how you view the world, alter how you feel about yourself? All of these kinds of questions that require one to interact with a medium and then to stop and reflect upon that interaction. But obviously, everything in our culture basically mitigates against that. So, for instance, perhaps I think, not perhaps, I know, the most common comment I got from the art of the film class is my students would say, "You're ruining film for me," right? Like they said, once I stop to think about what I'm watching, right, this is just becomes awful. And one of my students said, he was taking the class and he was like, oh gosh, so we've been talking about how films are constructed and things to think about. And he said, I sat down with my friends, we're all going to watch this movie. And it was some sort of murder thriller movie. And he says, in 1 minute, I knew how exactly the whole movie was going to go. And I just found it incredibly boring. Because he says, you ruined this experience for me because I was like, oh, click, 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 click. I say, okay, no, that guy's the person. Done. Right? And he's like, And it's like, right, like it's that sense of, we're told that. And they actually would articulate this, that if I think about it, if I begin to reflect on it, it ruins the experience. Right. And I get this notion of being lost in a narrative or being lost in a movie, which is great. Like that's an experience. But, at some point, even after, can you reflect back on? Well, that takes time. You have to stop. And then as my students report, once they start doing that, they recognize that they actually didn't even like a lot of the movies that they liked that much. Once they started thinking about it, they're like, I thought I liked it. But when I think about it, it's like, no, it's really stupid. Or it's just really, I've seen that movie 100 times in different versions. Or, the writing is unbelievably terrible. Or, who was filming? All of a sudden, all this come to the fore. And so now they're like, well, I just wanted to enjoy it uncritically. I wanted to just, and uncritically, not in that as good or bad, but in the sense of without engaging any sense of my own preferences, my own sensibilities, my own, outlooks. Once I start thinking about all this, now you're doomed, right? Now you've gone down the path of perdition. So even the idea of thinking about what they were watching, they said was problematic. Like this was alienating. And then once they started to do this, which of course the class made them do, they found it was alienating from their friends because you would make comments or have, one of my students, she was also talking about how she started making comments and her friends were like, no, don't say that. Shut up. You're ruining the experience for us. And she's like, oh no, like now my friends don't want to talk to me and I can't watch the movie. What am I doing? Right? She actually had this, and this again happened many times where she's like, oh no, like they actually don't even want to talk about this thing that we're doing in any way that I find interesting. What am I doing with all my time? And so then this is the alienation, right? Like the homelessness now kicks in because it's like, I am engaged with this art. I do want to think about it. And I realize that even the people who would theoretically be engaged in the art form don't really want to engage in it as an intellectual or cultural or personal growth, enrichment, exploration, experience. They really want to pursue it as simply mindless entertainment of the, just, I'm going to just watch and watch and watch, and then I don't have to think. Then I don't have to spend time with myself reflecting. And so because this is our training in our culture, it becomes weird. You become a strange person. I mean, it would be odd in a way, despite the fact that people have spent all of this money and all of this time developing film collections and having big screens put in their homes and doing all that kind of thing. It's odd. Like we're not used to being, hey, we're going to come over, we'll watch a selected film, whatever the mode is, and then we'll spend an hour or two discussing it. Like that seems like a burden. I was like, no, you watch 4 movies. until you're exhausted. No one can finish the fourth one because it's too late at night and you're all tired, and so you just leave. And see, this relieves any sense that you would have to think about, and you don't have time, and you don't all have any need for personal interaction. And so we've taken a powerful, an amazing art form that can be life-changing. Well, it's just art form, right? It's like all the other art forms. It can be great. It can be powerful. It can change your life. It can help you understand yourself. It can help you understand the world. And we've turned it into a mindless private consumption fest, which basically means it's not an art form at that point. And it's not film's fault. It's not movies. It's the fact of how we've been trained to consume them. And our culture absolutely asks us to do this. It does not want us to, on average, to spend time pondering these questions. And again, if you look at cultural representations of this, people who do stop and talk about film, or who do want to pause and reflect, they're always mocked, right? This is the deep currents of anti-intellectualism, particularly in American culture, right? You make fun of these people. You want to undercut them. You want to mock them because, oh, no, you don't get it. And of course, they only ever want to talk about, obscure, boring, weird films that were made in foreign countries that aren't good, that nobody actually enjoys. And so it's all torture and hateful. And that is the lesson that we take. And hence, when my students come in and tell me, like, oh, if you try to think about the movies you watch, it ruins them. It's like, there's so much to unpack there. Does it ruin them because you're watching films that are not even worth thinking about? That's probably part of it. Does it ruin it because once you start trying to engage your process of thinking about it, you realize something about yourself and your environment that makes you not like a film? So this doesn't have anything to do maybe with the merits or lack of merit to the film. It has a lot more to do about you. And then again, the fact that it might actually start alienating you from the people around you, because we are in this place of intellectual homelessness. And so best just not to think about it. And so that is where I really get my frustration level or frustration is not the right word, my, I guess, concern or my repeated despair almost at how our culture trains us to interact with even the most popular, most powerful, most contemporarily influential medium is as a drone, as a mindless consumer. The film festivals are huge. I know people who like film festivals. The town I was in used to have a very popular film festival, and I was shocked repeatedly. And I shouldn't have been, but it's like I would forget because I just couldn't imagine it. And they had all these levels of, badges that you could have so that you could get into films. And what it amounted to was the most expensive badge that you could get was the one that let you watch the most films. And so there were people who were coming to the film festival and over 4 days or 3 days were seeing, 12 films. And I'm going, you don't even have time to sleep practically, right? You're watching 8 or 12 hours of films a day. And then they're like, you could see them. They're like zombies. I would comment, like they even had problems walking because clearly they'd been in the dark. They'd been sitting, and then they would get up and go to another one. And you could see that they were kind of stiff and not moving well. And there'd be a lot of them going from one theater to another theater. I'm like, oh my gosh, they look a little scary. They look a little zombified. And these are, in theory, the biggest fans who are spending a lot of money and taking a trip to go from one place to another so they can imbibe a whole bunch of movies all at once. But where's the pause, right? Where is the moment where you stop and go, okay, well, what did I think of that? And so when we think of personal habits, this is where it really comes to the fore, is, watching 100 movies better than watching one. If you watch one, it moves you, you write about it, you think about it, you talk to your friends about it. I don't know, maybe you do some paintings inspired by this. You create an interpretive dance. You go for long walks and it fills your dreams. that's the interaction that we want, I would argue. This is what helps us have a sense of place. When we have something that fills us and gives us something meaningful to reflect on and chew on, and then that we can share. And there's a concept of the individual that comes from the Renaissance. And part of this, and this is kind of reading through between the lines of Renaissance cultural ideals and the education of a courtier, but what consistently comes up, and why was the Renaissance so fabulous, and why did they have so many fabulous people producing amazing architecture, art, and music, sculpture, just gardens, everything, it was the Renaissance, okay? Well, one reason was they had a concept of the individual as an art form in themselves. One of the most important things you were always supposed to be doing is cultivating your person. You were a garden. You were a cathedral. And so everything that you took in, everything you were exposed to, it was expected. In fact, it was almost a cultural necessity. Again, read the courtier, that you could think about it, reflect on it, make it your own, and then have some echo, not a reproduction of it, because that would be boring, but a creation of your own that extended it or enriched it or modified it or transmogrified it into something else. And that habit, that pattern, where when the Renaissance, if you read the Castiglione's The Courtier, or you read some of the lives of the other people participating in the Renaissance, it's as if they got up every morning and they're like, okay, how can I be fabulous today? I was fabulous yesterday, and I want to be more fabulous today, and then tomorrow I'm going to be more fabulous again, because I am the cathedral I'm building. I am the thing that is amazing. And if I am amazing, and I do a painting, or I sculpt a building, or I design a garden, or I write a poem, or I chat with people at a party, then that will be, I can't help but do amazing things. And see, we think of it the other way around. All of our technology, all of our training, all of our outlook is like, oh, you get a bunch of skills and experience, and then you apply that. And it's the skills and the experience and the technique and the technology that you have that allows you to create amazing work. And the Renaissance was more or less wanted to say the opposite. They really did believe very strongly, for the elites, of course, forget the peasants and the slaves and the servants, who cares about them? But for the people that we cared about, the people who mattered, it was, no, you make yourself fabulous, and then a fabulous person cannot help but do fabulous things, right? It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you paint or dance or write a poem or chat at a party. If you're fabulous, that'll be fabulous, right? This is their theory. And that sense of cultivating the individual for self-expression, there it is, right? That is the huge difference. And in the context of film, the way, one can take this in, one can make oneself fabulous, is to ponder more, watch less, ponder more, write notes, take the time to care about what you actually think you care about. I know this is an odd construction, so slow that down a bit. If you watch a lot of movies, it suggests you care about this. If you watch certain TV shows, it suggests you care about them. Okay, so take that seriously. Watch a movie, watch a film, watch a TV series you like. Take notes on the episodes. Think about what it is that appeals to you. Where else do you see those kinds of things? Find people to talk to about that. And this is a great sort mechanism because, again, I watch, very, very, very few movies, maybe 2 movies a year, maybe a few more documentaries. If you count documentaries, I'm all the way up to 5 or 6. And, but when I talk to people, most of the people who say, oh, I love movies, I love TV, I love film, whatever, I go, okay, why? And they're, oh, it's great. Like, okay, well, what did you like? Oh, it's fabulous. Okay, you want me to watch this TV show? What's good about it? Oh, it has this great actor in it, the great actor. Okay, what makes their acting? Oh, it's so good. I'm like, right. See, I'm not I was like, just a whole bunch of superlatives do not help enrich my life. Telling me things are superlative is like, oh, okay. But when you meet someone who, and often, by the way, people get very defensive if you tell them like, oh, again, I don't watch movies, I don't watch TV. So, well, but occasionally you meet someone who really is invested, who really does care, who really has cultivated a sense of this. And if you go, oh, I haven't seen that, why would I like this? And all of a sudden they'll start talking and you're like, oh, well, here's somebody I want to talk to. Because I can say, oh, I haven't seen that, but that kind of reminds me of the feeling that I get from this kind of music. And they're like, oh, well, that's the person who the person who wrote the score for this series or for this movie said was their inspiration. So like, yeah, that music is right there. And so all of a sudden, we're talking music and we're talking visuals and images. And I can talk to those people all night and have a wonderful time, very enriching. And then occasionally I'll actually go and watch what they suggested. So but notice this incredible distinction. And so often we're told that, oh, if you're going to be serious, you're going to be an intellectual, you have to like certain things, which again is another one of these lies. And it's one that my students felt very strongly. And it's like, no, like get that out of your mind. It's not about liking certain things. It's about actually caring about the things that you think you like, right? Really like them, like really invest in them, really care about them. And what happens when you do that is it transforms your experience of whatever it is you're doing. And of course, this is why they said, oh, you're ruining movies for me. You're ruining film for me. And what they meant, of course, by extension was you're ruining the kinds of things I thought I liked. And now I'm having to change my view or expand my mind or change my understanding. And you're also alienating me from my friends. So yes, but that's the goal. Right? What happens when you really care about the things that you say you care about? That's that's the experience. That's the value. It's not for someone to say, oh, you should read the Greek classics, although I think everybody should, but that's me. But that if you love film, like really love film, take notes, watch systematically, read books, read histories, explore the medium, have dreams, paint paintings, right? That kind of let it just enrich your life. Conversely, if you just watch TVs or movies as an escape, that's great, but understand that as well. Go, okay, this is just an escape. I'm tired, I don't want to do this. By the way, the one media that I really do consume is the NFL. Love the NFL, but it's my escape. It's like, oh, okay, I'm going to think about this or read about this to a very limited degree. But even there, even though it is kind of my thing I'm supposedly not thinking about, I often don't like to talk to other quote unquote football fans, is because they don't know anything about football. I'm like, how can you be a fan of this team for so long and not know anything about football, right? Like it just kind of drives me mad. That lack of investment in the things that you actually articulate that you say you care about, right? Don't worry about all the other stuff, but that you say you care about. And so if you look at the time that people spend with consuming media, it's going to be predominantly, on average, for the average American and much of the world, visual medium, primarily film and television of various kinds. And so it's like, okay, if that is true and you don't take it seriously and you don't invest in it, again, this is back to that self-alienation. Of course you feel alienated. Of course you feel isolated because the very thing you're doing is actually alienating you from it, right? Because of the way you've done it, because of the way you consume it. Those sorts of inputs fundamentally create problems because now you can't even communicate to the people who you would think you could share some community with. Because of the way you're consuming an experience and interacting is throwing up barriers. And when you encounter people who are like, oh yeah, we're into this. This is a big thing. We have, movie night over once a month over here. You should come. It's like, oh, well, that's weird because now I'm doing it communally and I always think of it as being private and people are going to ask me, and that looks like a weird movie. Like, okay, yeah, I don't want to do that. Like that's wrong in every way. And so what this says is your investment, your care for yourself and for what you're putting in your mind and how you're consuming it is not highly developed. And that what you make of the things is very limited and is creating those alienating barriers. And so when people, again, why aren't there 1 million across the United States small film gatherings? And I know they are. I know they exist. I'm not saying there aren't any of them. But considering how many people love to watch films, how many movies are out there, how much media can be consumed, and how many people have these really spectacular home theater installations, our entire training to think of this cultural phenomenon as functionally private and not to be shared and not to be communicated, that, you see, there you go again, right? These are these barriers, both our personal habits and our cultural structures. And if you look to the media that talks about film, which I do occasionally for various reasons, again, we're back to what we talked about before. What do they report? Box office numbers, number one at the box office flop, it lost so much money. What big actors or actresses are in it? They did a bad job. They did a good job. It failed. It succeeded. What's coming up next? Right? It's the inability to discuss subjectivity. It's the inability to say, oh, this is a horribly written film with a brilliant soundtrack. If you love soundtracks, absolutely go, because you're going to love it, even though this movie might be horrible in so many other beautifully filmed, terribly acted, right? If you love cinematography, go see this film, right? That sort of notion that there are different reasons to watch films, there's different kind of films that do different kinds of things that give people different psychological experiences or emotional encounters or moments in time. It's not that it doesn't exist. It's oh my gosh, it's so rare to try and track that down. And again, part of this is because so much of the medium is designed, as I mentioned last time, not to give us what we might want, but to give us what they're paid to promote, so that we think that we want to see something, even though I've actually talked to people who said this, oh, I'm going to go see this. I'm like, oh, right, well, yeah, it's probably going to be terrible. And you're like, excuse me, could you repeat that sentence? Because I'm not sure you heard yourself speak it. And they're like, well, I want to watch a movie, and I'll go see it. And then you talk to them, and whatever, a week later, and like, oh, how was the film? It was terrible. And you're like, okay, this is, I'm missing something here. And even structurally, if the local theater here, we have a small theater, one screen in Terre-Saint-Laville here in France, but it plays about 8 or 9 different movies a week. It has all the big box office movies, which will come in for a little bit and then go away. But the other 5 or 6 or 7 will be just obscure, small, medium-sized films from all over the world. And they play them in rotation. So there's different movies every day. And so you just look at the calendar. So there's more and more variety of films being played in my tiny town than if you live in a large city that has like a 16-plex or a 32-plex. If you look at that, what you have is 5 big Hollywood films playing on, 10 screens at a time. So, and for weeks. And so weirdly, in this small town in France, because of the cultural difference, I have the opportunity to see more films, which I absolutely don't take advantage of, than I would if I lived in a medium or even pretty good sized city in the United States, right? It's bizarre. But what that also communicates is that there's a huge opportunity for people who want to see smaller run films or want to see foreign films or less known productions to have all these private showings. Because you could just say, hey, we're going to watch the top Italian movies of the 80s or something and go, let's just see what was going on, because those are never going to be seen in the culture in the United States, as if there weren't great films made in Italy in the 80s. Maybe there weren't, I don't know. But there probably were. Probably, some good stuff done everywhere. So that kind of reflective moment where you go, hey, wait a second, I'm just being told and to watch certain things, not because I'm interested in it or it'll enrich me, but it's because it will make maximum amount of money for theaters and the movie industry. And that consistent message comes from the streaming services to the to the press and media, to the YouTube algorithm, to the local theater advertisements, to television advertisements, to what, it's an entire ecosystem that's designed not to enrich, but to exploit. And we're so enculturated in that we're like, okay, well, I go to see all the recent movies. I'm up to date. Therefore, I must really love movies and care about them. And this is not kind of the habits that lead to a sense of richness and a sense of self-cultivation. So those are some thoughts to reflect on. And then back to Barzan. So what Barzan was talking about, and again, this will come up more in the next couple of episodes, is when he watched baseball, he was basically having a different experience than most of the people who thought of themselves as baseball fans. And it wasn't that they weren't watching baseball. In fact, they were probably watching more baseball than Barzan was. But the way they were watching and what they did with the experience after they had watched were just vastly different. And for creating a sense of the house of the intellect, it is the way you watch and what you do with it that really helps to build the house. And we'll chat about that more next time. Thank you very much.